Hello, everybody. As 2025 begins to wind down, everyone's getting terribly nervous about the economic bubble, or what some see as the economic bubble. The Economist, which is, in my view, at least just about the best authority on global markets, is leading this week with a whole series of articles about how markets could topple the entire global economy. And one of the best pieces in this week's Economist is an article about what it calls the 7 deadly sins of corporate exuberance. One man who's been around the block a bit is my guest today. Aman Verjee is a member of the PayPal mafia. He was back at PayPal in the early 2000s. I think he wrote the first business plan with Peter Thiel. He's currently the general partner at Practical VC, and he has a new book out, perfectly timed, as so many Silicon Valley guys do. The Brief History of Financial Bubbles. Aman is joining us from Atherton in the South Bay, where, Aman, what's the average price of a house in Atherton? It's got to be over 5 to 10 million. It's the richest suburb in America, the wealthiest suburb at least.
Yes, that's what I'm told. It sounds about right. It's a beautiful section of town, but large properties, and yeah, 5 to 10 million sounds about like the price of poker around here.
Yeah, well, I'm not in that game, but you clearly are. Let's talk about a brief history of financial bubbles. As I said, your timing is just right, just as you've clearly timed a lot of smart moves in your life. Where are we in mid to late November when it comes to a brief history of financial bubbles? Are your alarm bells on as a VC, as an investor, as an American citizen?
Well, first, thanks for that kind introduction. It's great to meet you, as they say in American radio. I'm a longtime listener, but first-time caller of your podcast. The timing is a little bit fortuitous. I've been working on the book for about 2 years. It really began after the 2020-21 bubble, which I call in the book the Everything, Everywhere, All at Once bubble. I am a movie fan, but there's relevance to it because it was the first global multi-asset bubble we'd seen in probably in forever, and at least in the US, and certainly in over 100 years. I think where we're at now is there are parts of the broader market that seem to be overvalued, meaning just the valuations are running ahead of their fundamentals. The way that I define a bubble in the book is just you have a big run up in asset prices and then a subsequent run down. That's more or less symmetrical in a confined period of time. So the tulip bubble in Amsterdam is the first one that I start with.
Yeah, and for people just listening, there's lots of tulips on the cover of your new book.
That's right. And that is an example of a bubble where there wasn't a lot of economic value created. So you look back on it and you can explain it and understand some of the driving forces, but people lost money and there was no permanent value created. There are other bubbles, 2 of them in the book. One is the 1845 to 1849 UK railway mania. And then the other one is the dot-com bubble in 99-2000, principally here in the US and really centered here in Silicon Valley. And those were different because they created a lot of great companies. Like in the last bubble, we had NVIDIA and Amazon and PayPal, where I worked, and Yahoo and eBay, and then Salesforce. And out of the detritus of that bubble, Peter Thiel, who was a founder at PayPal, created Facebook. He was the first big investor in Facebook. Elon Musk was the other founder of the company. He went on to create SpaceX and Tesla. So there was a lot of loss in that internet sector, but a lot of value created. And where at the time, the price earnings ratio in 2000 was over 70 times earnings for the S&P 500 and the biggest stocks. And the Mag 7 today is 27 to 29 times earnings to sales, price to earnings. So it doesn't feel like the stuff that bubbles are made of. I do think AI is a transformative new technology. So it's going to create a lot of winners. We are seeing in the Valley, as an investor, I can tell you, we're seeing AI native companies getting valuations that are head scratchers. And I don't think a lot of the AI hype will end very well for a lot of companies. But I don't think it's on the order of those other 2 bubbles and that I mentioned in the book that are tech bubbles. And there's a lot of great companies that will get built in this phase.
I'm sure you mentioned in your brief history of financial bubbles, Carlota Perez's argument that every great technological leap forward requires a bubble because you create the investment, much of it gets lost, but the infrastructure remains. Is that the core narrative of our current AI mania, do you think?
Yeah, there's something to that. The idea that you need to have there are aspects of the bubble that are there's a negative connotation around the bubbles that are just being it's hype, it's fantasy, it's pulling in irrational investment. I guess what Alan Greenspan would have said, or irrational exuberance. He makes a speech in 1996, and the internet bubble keeps on going, and then there's a reset. And I don't know that it's necessary to have this story, this hype, in order to bring the investment in. There are other periods when technologies have received investment without the same kind of irrational exuberance. But I think it depends a lot on the in the Valley. When you're a venture investor, you look at business plans, and very often the best plans. In fact, as I said, I wrote the first one for PayPal. We changed our business plan 3 times between '99 and 2002 when we went public, and there was a lot of optimism and hope and speculation in each one of those plans until one finally hit it right. And so there's an element of truth to that argument that you have to have some imagination in order to create the capital investment that then motivates the technology.
What was it, Aman, about PayPal that attracted? Was it just luck that attracted so many people? You've already mentioned Thiel and Musk, who of course are best known, but there were so many others. Reid Hoffman comes to mind.
Yes,
and so many other investors and entrepreneurs who have gone on to shape the digital economy. What was it like back when you were writing those business plans with Thiel and Musk?
It was incredible. I think there was a certain amount of luck or just network effects in it. Peter was a Stanford law student when I was undergrad. So I met him when we were both on campus. He was a little ahead of me, but he started a newspaper called the Stanford Review, which was a politically right-wing, let's call it libertarian to conservative thought.
To be polite, Aman, and my wife, who was at law school with Thiel, would use other words to describe it, but go on.
Well, I'm interested in what she would say, but I'm the chairman of the board of the Review today, and we definitely had folks like Peter and Keith Raboy was also on the Stanford Review staff. David Sachs was on the Stanford Review staff.
And of course Sachs now is the AI czar. I know that my wife and some of her friends at Stanford Law saw it in racist and sexist terms. You're not a white male. How did you get sucked into all this?
Well, I don't think it was. I didn't think it was racist. Obviously, as you astutely point out, I'm not white, and I'm not predisposed to want white supremacy to be what defines me. What I argued for was evaluating people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. So when I was there, I opposed things like affirmative action at admissions and a lot of the things that we're seeing on campuses now in terms of having a merit-based admissions process. Free speech was another big topic on campus, the ability to express ideas without criticism. That's really what the review wanted. And they were very also in favor of a Western civilization requirement where you would read great literature that has defined Western civilization and British and American history. If you want to call that racist, I guess that's fine. We can debate that. But it did generate a lot of folks, you said David Sachs and myself and others who then went on to work for PayPal. And so Peter first began to hire from that network. And that was, I think, a bit of personal.
Although not everyone was united politically. Hoffman, of course, is perhaps the most powerful donor of the Democratic Party. So
Indeed.
I'm assuming in those early days you used to have, shall we say, debates, colorful debates about politics in the PayPal office. I know Thiel banned any discussion of sports, didn't he?
I don't remember that.
I think that was a criteria for hiring people. If they came in and they had any interest in sports, they wouldn't get a job. I assume you weren't a sports guy.
Not actually, I was. Maybe I was the exception. I actually played semi-professional ice hockey when I was in high school in Canada. Maybe I didn't put that on my resume. So
what can we learn about that period? PayPal, my wife used to work for PayPal too. PayPal has collapsed recently ever since Dan Schulman left. Some people blame him for the collapse. It was an early .com boom. What can we learn about the dot-com boom and what's happened since from PayPal itself. When I went to the PayPal site,
Right.
there was a promise of getting 5% cash back when you pay in 4. It seems too good to be true. Maybe it is. Crypto, the lust for crypto is the #1 sign in The Economist this week of 7 deadly corporate sins. So what can we learn from PayPal, not just from the PayPal mafia, but about the story of PayPal, about today's irrational exuberance?
Yeah, well, I think the benefit of that early PayPal team was it was a very high performing team. In addition to Reid Hoffman, Roelof Botha, who was until recently the Sequoia head, he was her CFO.
Yeah, who's the grandson of the Botha, who was the last president in apartheid South Africa, got pushed out for his conservative political views, it seems.
Yeah, I don't know if Roelof shares those. I don't think he does. But that incredible team that came together has done great things subsequently. And they had the money and the desire. And because of those personal connections, I think that brought us together. We're very innovative, very product focused. It's the most high quality, high product focused teams I think I've ever been on, and I've been on a number since. More recently, and then when I left, this is 2010, PayPal was owned by eBay. They got spun off from eBay. They had a pretty good run, really up until the pandemic. They were a $300 billion market cap company. But these businesses change. Payments is very competitive. I think PayPal has struggled in the last 5 years. I would say that I would observe they got less innovative and less cutting edge. They were a thin margin business with the pandemic because they were doing processing for larger merchants. They somehow got behind Square. Square was able to out innovate them and bring payments offline to small merchants, something that PayPal missed. Then you had the rise of crypto, which created a lot of winners and USDC. PayPal has a wallet. Could have been the USDC company.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you buy Dan Schulman's argument that you can do good and be rich at the same time?
I think so. I think it's hard, to be honest. If I were to guide my founders, I would tell them pick one. If you want to be good and you want to build a charity, that's fine. If you want to run a profitable company, that has to be the priority. It's tough to do one thing right, much less solve for different things that are sometimes in tension. If your business model is one that benefits consumers and you've got sustainable profit pools, that's great. And that's what I think every founder aspires to. But you do have to keep your shareholder hat on and make sure that you're doing right in terms of building value for the business and being very careful when you leave that mission.
It seems to be an uncanny connection between South Africa and those early PayPal days. Of course, Musk is from South Africa. I think Thiel was born in South Africa, or certainly spent some of his childhood there. Sachs is from South Africa. Burloff is his family is one of the most powerful families in South Africa. Today, of course, some of these characters are quite close to Donald Trump, who has made South Africa again central. It seems to be the only people in the world are white South Africans he wants to bring to America. What's your take on the PayPal South Africa Trump connection?
I don't know about South Africa. Peter was born in Germany, actually. I think his parents were serving overseas, and so
he does have a South African connection as well, doesn't he?
I don't know, to be honest. I couldn't speculate of those connections. There is a closeness to Donald Trump. Peter had advised Trump in 2015-16 when he was heading up the transition team when President Trump was elected the first time. I did advise a little bit on economic policy and taxation, and so spent some time with him. As he said, David Sachs is working for the president now. I think a lot of the stuff we like about Trump is on AI and crypto and deregulation. Those are fundamentally the policy preferences we would have. I'm also a low tax guy, but I'm also anti-tariffs and I'm pro, trade and pro-immigration. So we don't necessarily agree. But a lot of what you learn at PayPal is, as I said with Peter and Reid and Keith Raboy, you disagree, but if it's not personal and it's in the spirit of better ideas, that was something that was richly rewarded by that early PayPal team. It was a very, very ideas, not personal kind of group.
Yeah, and in real time, I just checked on Thiel's childhood. I don't want to smear the guy. He gets smeared enough. He did spend part of his childhood in Namibia. Anyway, let's leave PayPal and Thiel and Musk and South Africa. What is different today about the boom, Aman? It seems to me as if the big 7 or 8 tech companies are driving everything, and these companies are for real. There wasn't an equivalent to them in the 90s.
No, that's quite right. The companies we're seeing now, I think the Mag 7 is, I want to say 55% of the NASDAQ Composite Index and probably 30% of the S&P 500. So the concentrations are very high. At the same time, the equal weighted S&P 500 is at all-time highs as well. So the rest of the market, while left behind on a relative basis, is still performing well. I think what's different this time than, let's say, 99, 2000 is just the profitability of these companies. Their ability to generate cash flows and profitability is something we didn't see at the top of the market in 99, 2000. In that UK railway boom that I mentioned, 1845 to 1849, the big railroads that I write about, the Stockton and Darlington line or Liverpool, Manchester, they were making a little bit of money, but not a lot. And it took them years to grow into the valuations that the investors figured on in 1845. And so those investors would have lost money in the late 1840s. The good news for them, and maybe now, is after that bubble reset, between 1850 and 1873, the UK led the world in industrial production. It was the end of the Industrial Revolution. It became the richest country in the world. The Great Victorian Boom, they call it, was driven by a lot of railways and technology, just as I think the US of the last 20 years has been driven by technology developed and fiber laid during the 1990s. So there are similarities to those two booms. The AI infrastructure is very relevant. The one other big difference is at the top of the market, 99, 2000, 99% of the fiber communication, the optic fiber laid was dark, like it wasn't being used. NVIDIA right now could probably double its capacity on GPUs, and it'll still be, every one of those GPUs will be lit up on day one. So if they're capacity constrained and they're demand driven, as opposed to what you saw at the top of the internet bubble, which was a lot of dark fiber being laid, a lot of capacity that never got used because internet usage just wasn't keeping up with the supply and capacity.
So do you, we've talked about this on the show several times. Do you think that there is one could compare, say, Cisco and NVIDIA, or is NVIDIA not going to collapse as Cisco did as the dot-com boom popped?
I think the NVIDIA is, I think it's in a better position than Cisco was for one reason being, if I look at their revenues and their sales, they're at 200 billion in revenues. And if I look at their profitability, they're at about 50 times trailing earnings, but they're also 25 times forward earnings. And they're based on their contracts ahead and what their CapEx plans seem to be, they could continue to grow for the next 2 or 3 years. And as I said, they're capacity constrained. I don't think that was true of Cisco. They had a much richer valuation at the top of the bubble. They were also reliant on internet traffic building at an unsustainable rate that just never proved out. So the assumptions under Cisco are a lot more dangerous and more speculative than right now.
The Economist this week makes it clear that this is an unusual bubble, if that's the right word, boom, because we're so aware of it. But of course, it's so hard to time economic collapses. You have a great quote on the cover of your VC firm, Practical VC, from the great philosopher Yogi Berra. Predictions are hard, especially about the future. Why is it so hard, Aman, to predict what seems inevitable? If not the bursting of a bubble, certainly a sharp economic correction.
Yeah, it's a great question. I do love Yogi Berra, as you can tell from my my wall. I'm also
well, it's a great quote. I mean, it really is brilliant. Predictions are hard, especially about the future. Although it's hard to predict the past as well, I think, in a different kind of.
I am a sports guy. I don't know how I got hired at PayPal early on, based on what you said. I think what we're seeing, even at the top of the bubble in 1999, I remember that there was discussion about bubbles. That's not new. In fact, Peter offered me a job in 1998, and I remember telling him, Peter, I think we're in a bubble. I might just go to Harvard Law School, get my degree, so I'll have that. At least I'll have that degree. And if PayPal is so great, it'll be there in 3 years, and I'll come talk to you then. So I was aware of it in 98, 99. I remember Peter saying, "Yeah, we are in a bubble, but we'll be different. PayPal will make it, and the others won't." And he explained to me why, and he was right. Even in 1845, there's literature about that UK railway mania where there was criticism about the bubble. There were critics like Defoe, and the first time the word bubble was used was in 1720 in the middle of the South Sea bubble, and there was an awareness of it. And there was a British MP named Archibald Hutchison who wrote great analytical reports about why the UK railway boom, was irrational, and how these investors would be disappointed, and how the government should do something to stop it. But on the other side, you've got the enthusiasts who are
the retail guys. I mean, that's one of the things that the economists talk about, retail
yes,
envy. It's it's the old story, Aman, you were around at the time. Everyone sold their stock when in 1999 they would get into a San Francisco cab. This was, of course, pre-Uber.
yes.
And the cab driver would talk to them about Yahoo stock. So we're in a similar situation now with, maybe we don't have cab drivers anymore. Maybe it's Uber drivers talking to their customers about OpenAI or NVIDIA,
Yes.
or some other AI, or of course crypto.
Yes, I think there's a lot of this is human nature. There's imagination. There's fear of missing out. There's excitement and exuberance. And even though some people are critical of it and arguing for it, there's always a counter argument. Like, this time is different. AI companies will change the world. The thing will.
We know that once. When someone says this time it's different, you politely get out of the cab or the Uber.
Or you tell the business, and we see this all the time with AI companies getting valuations in the valley at 25, 50 million pre-seed valuations, fresh ideas, a lot of creative thinking. It's just optimism and ambition. And if you haven't lived through it before, you're inclined to believe that maybe this is different. And luckily, I've been around the block a couple of times, as you said, and I've seen a couple of bubbles come and go, and have studied them for this reason. So you can be a bit more measured and circumspect, but that requires history and patience and education, which I'm not sure is the strong suit of a lot of founders right now.
Yeah, and there's also one of the consistencies is criminality. Another of the great quotes you have on your VC website is from next generation Yogi Berra, Dave Chappelle. Why run the full marathon when you can join at mile 13 and still win? Of course, there was Enron back then. Today, I'm sure there's an Enron in the works. One of the 7 deadly sins the Economist lists is avaricious fraud. Do you think there is a lot of fraud in this current boom? Are we going to uncover an Enron or something even bigger? Is it conceivable, for example, Aman, that Sam Altman's OpenAI, which of course was co-founded with your friend Elon Musk, is a larger, more dangerous version of Enron?
It's possible. I'd be an idiot if I said it was impossible. We can look back at the bubbles in my book, and at the top of the bubble there always is, whether it's the South Sea Company paying bribes to politicians in 1720, whether it's the examples of Enron, or even more dangerous was WorldCom and Global Crossing in 2001. What I point to in the book is there were really 2 bubbles in that internet. We now think of it as the internet bubble, but there were really 2 of them. There was an internet bubble and mania, which had the companies like Amazon and Pets.com. Not a lot of fraud, just ambitious business plans. The owners didn't sell out at the top. I mean, Jeff Bezos never sold shares, and the internet CEOs typically didn't sell shares or take money out. Then there was a telecom bubble right after that, which pulled in 20 times more money, bank debt and equity. We had nefarious actors like Andy Fasto, and people at Global Crossing and WorldCom sold shares at the top and cashed out, and that destroyed a lot more value, was a lot more damaging, created a lot more of these accounting restrictions now that sort of happened in a post-SOX era. I'm sure there's something going on with these big AI companies. So one candidate to consider is just the amount of money you need to raise in order to build out the capacity is extraordinary. They're all burning capital. It's very unusual for a tech company, right? Tech companies, internet companies never burned capital. They were always asset light, and you could sell stuff online and scale. But that's not true of AI. It requires power and energy and cash. And so there are revenue deals being done between NVIDIA and OpenAI and Oracle and NVIDIA.
This is what the economists describe as lazy circularity. Maybe that's a euphemism, the lazy, at least. I mean, everyone's doing deals with everyone else, but it's not entirely clear why anyone should be making any money and who's paying for any of it.
Yes, that is right. And whether it's fraud or it's a little bit of, I don't know if it's outright fraud. I think a lot of these companies they've got A-plus investors who are scrutinizing these deals and really thinking through the valuations. These aren't retail driven. This isn't, dumb money. But there is a danger that these deals rely on money being raised and then being moved around in a bit of a circular transaction. If once that network unwinds and collapses, it can happen very quickly, and that's another top of the market phenomenon I described in my book. So
And some of the companies involved at the heart of this seem quite mature ones, like Oracle.
yes, absolutely right. NVIDIA's been around since 1993. Google is in a lot of these deals as well. AMD is in a lot of these deals. It'd be weird if it's systematic, but at the same time, there's got to be a few bad eggs in there, and I'm sure we'll discover them along the way. But I don't think it's systematic or has like a systemic risk that we should be that worried about.
Aman, in your new book, A Brief History of Financial Bubbles, I know you spent quite a lot of time discussing the British railway boom of the 19th century and how that speaks to financial bubbles, both as the promise and a warning. The difference, though, in mid-19th century America to early 21st, mid-19th century Britain to early 21st century US is that Britain didn't have a rival. Germany was still an agricultural economy. The United States was still mostly agricultural. Today, of course, America has China as a competitor, which in some people argue, including the NVIDIA CEO, that China will beat America on the OpenAI front. The sixth feature that The Economist includes in their deadly sins is patriotic pride in the US.
Yeah.
If the mania, I'm quoting the Economist, if the mania has an anthem, it's Born in the USA, although I don't think Bruce Springsteen would be very keen on this particular mania. Is that a difference where the US does have a very clear rival, China, whereas Britain didn't?
That's really interesting that you asked that. It occurred to me as I was writing, and by the way, Born in the USA it's a very un-American song if you actually listen to the lyrics. It's beautifully done. I love it. But there's
Did you see the latest Bruce Springsteen movie?
No, I haven't yet.
You should see that. It's good because it speaks of the making of Nebraska and Born in the USA, kind of their simultaneous parallel projects.
Yes. Okay. It's on my to-do list. It does strike me as a very rich and deep and meaning song, but there's a definite anti-American. I'm an immigrant and I came here and I love America. So I'm maybe very hypersensitive to criticisms of America. But it did strike me that all these bubbles happen in the richest country in the world when there's unquestioned political military hegemony. Britain in the 1820s had just eclipsed Napoleonic France. So 1820s and 1840s Britain, as you say, was unrivaled. The US in 1999, 2000 had just eclipsed the Soviet Union, which had crumbled, and that left the US as the sole global superpower. So I don't know what to make of that other than maybe coincidence, or maybe when you are the leading country in the world and you're the global reserve currency, there's some optimism and capital flowing in that then fuels that dynamism at the top of the market. And maybe that's that's sort of where we are today. But I do agree if the economist argument is patriotic pride and a protectionist set of policies that then protect certain industries or creates favored industries and does that with subsidies and cheap money, then that is a real problem. The other highlight of every bubble that I looked at is easy money, cheap money, a lot of government policy, but not always. It's always a facet of the bubble. It's a predicate of it. It's the tinder and the kindling that then sets off the flame of the bubble. It could be lower interest rates. It could be the Fed printing money. It just could be directed lending into certain favored categories, and that's always something that happens at the top of the bubbles as well.
I'm not going to make any Tinder jokes, Aman. When it comes to the bursting of the bubble, yes. I'm not sure what the equivalent was in 19th century England, whether the government said we have to save these railway companies because it's the future of the company. But as you know, there's been a great debate about the idea of OpenAI being too big to fail. Your ex PayPal colleague, David Sachs, who works for Donald Trump, seems to be strengthening the state in terms of its investment in tech. Trump has invested in Intel and become more and more involved in the innovative economy. Are we creating a situation, and what can we learn from history, where a company like OpenAI, partially because of its size and investment, and partially because of its importance to America's AI project in its competition with China, is too big to fail, and that a bubble, a collapse, will result in the American government, for better or worse, coming in and saving OpenAI in the same way as they came in and saved the banks in 2008?
Yeah, that would be the best parallel, I think, for a failure, a systemic risk, where the government then stepped in and had to bail out the market participants. There are not a lot of other examples like that in the book, but if I just think about the AI example, so David Sachs is actually on the recent podcast, and I've heard from him directly. He does not think OpenAI is too big to fail, which I'm happy to hear. We have lots of AI competitors. There's Anthropic, and as well as OpenAI. There's probably half a dozen LLMs that are all Google, Gemini, and Meta has a more of an open source philosophy. There's smaller companies that are also very sophisticated and growing in that space. There's no one. If one of them fails, there'll be 5 others that emerge tomorrow. So I don't think having a national security mentality, like we have to save OpenAI and therefore.
And there's Anthropic, of course, which is probably the clearest direct competitor to OpenAI.
Yeah. Sorry, which one?
Anthropic.
Yeah. Yep. And those are just the 2 biggest ones. But all the Mag 7 have versions of this, and we have an investment in Cohere in our portfolio. So I don't think there's any danger right now of one failing and then that somehow America loses its edge. I'm not a big fan of supporting picking winners and losers in an economy and trying to get something like a 5%, 10% share of Intel or Nvidia and having board seats. I think this is precisely the kind of policy that Republicans actually used to oppose. And when governments tried to do that, I think we rightly said, you should let the market work and not pick winners and losers with an industrial policy. It didn't. One example where it didn't work was Japan. That's another bubble that I cover in my book. There was a bit of a narrative on Japan in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, picking winners and then being so smart in their selection of winners that they were growing faster than the U.S. And it wasn't just that they were a trade-oriented, export-oriented, quickly industrializing nation. Well, the 1980s came along, and you might remember there was a real debate about whether Japan's third way is better than the American capitalist system or the Soviet communist system. And then the bubble happened, and then it collapsed. And 30 years later, I guess 35 years later now, Japan GDP per capita is no higher than it was in 1990 in currency.
But China is different in the sense that I mean I'm not suggesting that it's the reverse because of their economic might and the fact that they are investing. I mean, for example, Aman, I've talked about this on the show a lot recently.
Yeah,
China's massive state investment in renewable energy will have a significant impact on the US-Chinese rivalry, particularly given the importance of energy in powering the AI revolution.
Yeah, they are an example of a more directed economy. Although on a per capita basis, they're still 1/6 of where the U.S. is. So, and they're having major problems right now. I think there may be another bubble to pop, which is the Chinese real estate bubble, which might be the next one. So, but even so, there is a role for the government to play, and they have been much more, I think, forward thinking than we have in a couple of areas. One is energy. They're standing up 10 nuclear power plants a year. These new Gen 4 nuclear power plants will be key to AI because AI is very energy intensive.
And solar, of course, and wind. It's not just nuclear in China.
No, that's true. But the in California, where you and I are, we have wind and solar investments, but they've been unreliable. We're not using natural gas very much. We're down to one nuclear power plant, Diablo Canyon in San Luis Obispo. So there is a role to play for government to facilitate some of these.
Yeah, we did a show on nuclear on nuclear power recently.
Yeah.
How in comparison with your South Bay friends, neighbors, the Mark Andreessens of the world, how bullish are you on the American future? We did a show this week with Philip Howard, who has a book called Saving Can Do, How to Revive the Spirit of America. he suggests we need less lawyers, less legislation. You're a graduate of Harvard Law School, as well as an entrepreneur and a VC, so you know this debate from every side. Are the lawyers in control? The FT ran a headline recently about the Chinese engineering model beating the American lawyer model.
Yeah, I listened to that podcast. I loved it. I am also in the camp of I don't know if they're in control. That's a bit much, but I'm definitely in the camp of lower taxes and deregulation would be great. In California, we can't build. I mean, NVIDIA just announced a couple of months ago, I guess now, $500 billion in investment in America. Not a penny of it is going into California, its home state. It's all going to Texas and Phoenix because they can build there. They can build data centers and they don't have the same permitting timeline. I can't even knock down the bird feeder in my backyard without a permit.
Yeah, I can't get to you from my home in San Francisco to Atherton. It'd take me about 3 hours to get there by train, right, because I have to get at least 2 different trains to do it, and public transportation is terrible. And of course, one of the most chilling stories in all this is the failure of California to build high-speed rail between San Francisco and Los Angeles. The Klein Thompson book Abundance focuses on that.
Yeah, well, look, I coach Little League baseball and soccer for my daughters. They're 11 and 14. At the end of every game, we do roses, thorns, and then snacks in that order. The roses are, hey, what worked? And then the thorns are, what didn't work? And the thorns are, obvious. I think litigation and regulation and the involvement of unions and the economy and just our education system not graduating enough people with degrees that we need. Those are all negatives, and so I get that. But there are a lot of roses in America. I mean, I'm here as an immigrant for a reason. I still feel like it's the most dynamic.
Where did your parents come from, Aman?
I was born in Nairobi in Kenya, and they left Kenya actually as refugees and moved to Canada. They're still in Canada now. But even as a kid, I loved America, and I wanted to be an investment banker when I was a kid growing up. So I was attracted to Wall Street. And we have the best universities in the world. Stanford and Harvard is where I went, and I'm partial to those, but there are lots of others. We have the AI sector is really here in Stanford. Between you and I, where we live, it's kind of where 80% of AI is in the world right now. And so we're tech focused, we're tech forward. We still have a dynamic and high functioning economy. We attract the best people from all over the world as immigrants. Hopefully, we continue to do that.
Although Donald Trump seems to be in trouble on that front from the right wing of his coalition. Some people don't think that he should be letting anyone into the country.
Yeah, that's a part of the coalition that I just find their economics and their arguments against Trump. And the best argument I would have against them, the I guess anti-immigration, anti-H-1B, MAGA right, is look, here's a list of people who came here on H-1Bs, right? If you want to shut this off, these people could not have come here. Elon Musk is one. Max Levchin, founder of PayPal, is another. I'm a third. Melania Trump, by the way. So, before you criticize the president on H-1Bs, just know that. But Satya Nadella, the head of Microsoft, and Sergey Brin at Google, and Sundar Pichai, the current CEO of Google, all of us came here on H-1Bs. All of us paid our taxes and have created millions of American jobs, billions, trillions in shareholder value. And so there is a value to having a smart immigration policy. I'm not saying let everyone in, and illegal immigration is different. And if you commit a crime and you're an enemy of America while you're here by engaging in protest, I get all that stuff. But at the same time, there are lots of great people who come as a result of our immigration policies and our great heritage. And if we can do that, and we've got the best companies in the world and the most innovation in the world, then I am very bullish on it. I'm glad that my daughters are here. They're learning from the best schools. They're in Palo Alto and Atherton with me. I would imagine that they will continue to choose to live in America for all the reasons that I said.
If copyright law wasn't so strict, I would play Born in the USA now after what you said. So let's end with your wisdom. You clearly have given a lot of thought to this in your new book, A Brief History of Financial Bubbles, as well as your experience on lots of fronts as an investor, entrepreneur, friend of Thiel, blah, blah, blah.
A lawyer, as you said, you graduate of law school anyway.
Yeah, you went to law school, which, it's not a bad thing as long as you didn't practice law.
I never did. No, thank God.
Let's end with one reason to be cheerful about our current quote unquote financial bubble, and one reason to worry. What keeps you up at night, and what gets you up in the morning and all enthusiastic and excited about the world?
Well, I've got the great privilege of being an investor in the Valley, and the types of businesses and the businesses I've seen grow in the last 20 years, my time in the Valley, and the business plans I'm still seeing today. Companies like PayPal, but also, Google and Meta and Alphabet and all the amazing innovations that have happened in the last 20 years have been very close to me. I've invested in a bunch of them. We're in SpaceX right now, just a transformative company, transformative technology. And it feels like these companies can only be successful here in America because of our capital markets and our can-do attitude and our optimism and just the American spirit. The thing that I get worried about, I do get worried about over regulation. I saw it with the Biden administration regulating AI and crypto and almost strangling it in their crib. I do worry about the current administration, on things like tariffs and an increased role in corporate America taking equity shares. And I don't like where that's going to go. And I worry a little bit that valuations might be getting ahead of fundamentals, but at the same time, the bubbles I've seen, inevitably that resets if the markets are allowed to work. And then you come out of that stronger, and the companies learn a great lesson about being capital efficient and growing through bubbles. And so, on net, I'm very optimistic.
Yeah, and I have to finally ask you: The Economist's first deadly sin is the lust for crypto, which now includes Donald Trump. Although earlier he always used to write it out, to write it off. Is crypto for real, Aman, or is it just a scam? Simple question to end on.
Yeah.
Yes or no?
I don't think it's a scam. I would say Bitcoin is for real. That is a real currency with a cap on it that cannot be printed. It cannot be created, unlike fiat currency. I think it's a great hedge against fiat currency, like digital gold. Altcoins in general, maybe Ethereum is real. Altcoins in general, I'd say that's probably not a lot of economic value. More like the tulip bubble than the tech.com bubble.
Well, there you have it. A brief history of financial bubbles in a bubble from Aman Verjee, wonderful guest. Aman, you have to come back on the show when the bubble bursts. We'll bring your wisdom to making sense of how we can control it and how we can rebuild the economy. Congratulations on the new book, and I will see you at some point in Atherton if I manage to find my way there.
Thank you, Andrew. Anytime. Love being on.